Hi, my name is Jason Grohl. This is my micro peer teaching video for EDSU 531. Here's all the introduction info. I'm not going to read it to you to keep the video shorter. You can pause it if you want to stop and read it. The only thing I will say is that there are two content standards for history that are being addressed. I kind of developed an entire lecture and lesson for this that was way too long for the video. The beginning deals with 11.7.6, the development of the atomic weapons in World War II, and the latter half, where we get to the discussion, focuses on 11.7.7, the discussion discuss the decision to drop atomic bombs and the consequences of the decision. So that's why that one's in bold. I'm going to give you a brief overview real quick of the PowerPoint I built to where the students would have information to use in their discussion to build their opinions with for our discussion. So let's get going with that. So title slide, I made up fake pages and a fake textbook that would go along with this. So you get your lesson objectives, review of information the students already know, kind of the planned invasion of Japan. Anytime you see a red box like that in the bottom left, that's where I would stop for kind of a quick partner or group discussion for the students to answer that question. So we go through the Manhattan Project, development of atomic bombs, how they work. And this would all be being described and very interesting to the students. So we keep going all through here. There would be a separate lesson in a couple days about the actual end of World War II, and here's where we're going to get started. So let's jump into this. Alright, so about a year after the end of World War II, some people started asking if using atomic bombs against Japan was the right thing to do. And that's still a topic of debate for many historians today. So, was Truman's decision to use atomic weapons justifiable? Now, there are basically two ways to answer this question. Yes, Truman's decision to use atomic weapons was justifiable because, and we'll get some support for that, or the other possible answer would be no, Truman's decision to use atomic weapons was not justifiable. So let's take a look at some explanations behind each of these opinions. The first reason many people think Truman was justified in his decision to use atomic weapons was that it ended the war quickly, potentially saving millions of lives. Remember Secretary Still's estimation that an invasion of mainland Japan would lead to over 1 million Allied casualties. In addition to that, you have the number of Japanese military and civilian casualties. Those would have easily reached into the millions. So many people see the use of the atomic bombs as a decision that actually saved lives in the long term. The second argument for the use of atomic weapons was that atomic weapons were created to be military weapons, and the United States was at war. The atomic bombs were basically the biggest and baddest weapon ever invented, and so why wouldn't you use them in the biggest, baddest war ever fought? One thing that pushed Truman over the edge to using atomic bombs was knowing that if he did not, in the future he would have to tell the United States citizens that he had a weapon that could have prevented 1 million United States casualties in Japan, but he decided not to use it. That kind of pushed him over the edge. The third reason people think that Truman was justified in his decision to use the atomic bombs was that the scientists of the Manhattan Project they didn't predict that radiation poisoning would be a side effect of the atomic blasts. It's weird to think about that in hindsight, but the scientists, they just really weren't that interested in radiation poisoning. In fact, many of the plans of the invasion of Japan called for U.S. and Allied soldiers to occupy the territories and the areas that atomic bombs went off in only about a week or so after the bombs were used. So while the radiation poisoning in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was devastating, we can't really hold that against Truman because he just didn't know that would be a factor. A lot of people didn't. So let's look at a couple of arguments that says Truman was not justified in his decision. The first argument was that Japan's ability to war was greatly diminished, and they would have surrendered without the use of atomic bombs. The Japanese were running very low on gasoline. Their navy was basically a non-factor at this point, like we've talked about. So a lot of people think that the United States could have just waited and Japan would have eventually surrendered. Whether or not that idea matches the way the Japanese soldiers had been fighting and had behaved up until that point in the war, or whether or not sitting and waiting is a good military strategy, are other questions you'd have to ask with that one. The second reason some people disagree with Truman's decision to use atomic bombs against Japan was that racism was a factor, and that atomic bombs would not have been used against Germany or another European nation. Some people think that the only reason atomic bombs were not used against Germany was because Germany surrendered before the atomic bomb was ready to be used. However, think about the different ways that Japanese Americans were treated during World War II compared to German Americans and Italian Americans. Think back to the propaganda project that we did a couple weeks ago. Were Japanese soldiers illustrated differently than German or Italian soldiers? So that kind of lends some credibility to that explanation of people's opinion. The third argument against Truman's use or decision to use the atomic bombs was that Truman only wanted to use atomic bombs to send a message to Joseph Stalin. As we've talked about, it was no secret that the United States and the Soviet Union really disliked each other, and that once this whole World War II thing was over and out of the way, the United States and the Soviet Union were going to be huge rivals. To top that off, when Truman was first told about the successful Trinity test, that one in Los Alamos, New Mexico, that we talked about a little earlier, remember he was at the Potsdam Conference with Stalin and Churchill, and he had just come out of a meeting with Stalin, where Stalin had basically been trying to bully Truman into, letting Stalin get his way. And so that has led a lot of people to think that atomic bombs were used to just kind of send a message to the Soviet Union, kind of like a, hey, we have a bomb that can destroy an entire city, don't mess with us. On a side note, many people consider the atomic bombs that went off over Hiroshima and Nagasaki to be both the last shots fired in World War II and the first shots fired in the Cold War. If you don't know what the Cold War is, don't worry, we'll get to that in our next unit. Alright, so next, let's get to your homework for tonight. When you walked in, you should have picked up the atomic bomb discussion preparation graphic organizer. Get that out, and we'll go over that in a minute. For homework, you're going to fill that out and bring it to class tomorrow. It's going to help you out with our class discussion. When you're done with that, it's going to go in your class binder. This graphic organizer you have, along with another one that you're going to pick up tomorrow, are going to be the last things that go into your binder for this unit. Besides the graphic organizer, all you need to do tonight is making sure your class binder is up to date. Your binders will be due on Friday, and study for the unit exam. That's also going to be on Friday. Like normal, we'll be having our Jeopardy review the day before the test, so that's going to be on Thursday. And last, let's take a look at the graphic organizer that you guys will be doing for homework tonight. Right underneath the title, it has the question for you: was Truman's decision to use atomic weapons against Japan justifiable? You're going to decide whether you think yes, it was justifiable, or no, it was not justifiable. Make sure you circle your answer. It'll just make everything get started tomorrow a lot easier. In the boxes below, you're going to write 3 explanations that support your opinion and why you think that explanation is important. To find explanations, you can use your class notes from this unit. You can look up things in your textbook, or you can kind of come up with explanations of your own that kind of pop into your head. One thing I don't want you guys to do is I do not want you guys to be using the internet to find explanations. We'll get to that in a second. If you want to use any of the explanations from today's notes, those ones we just went over, that's fine. Just stick to only using a maximum of one of those examples. That way we just have a variety of different explanations to discuss tomorrow. We don't have the same, everyone using the same, three explanations to support their point. Now back to not using the internet sources. The reason for that is tomorrow when we're having our class discussion, I want this to be a discussion of your explanations, not a discussion of a bunch of explanations from people on the internet. Okay, anyone have any questions so far? Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. The section, why this explanation is important, that's where you write your reason for choosing that explanation. It's basically why you think that explanation is important. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, looks like the bell's going to ring in about 45 seconds. You guys can go ahead and start packing up. Make sure to get that graphic organizer done for tomorrow. Bring that with you. Keep getting your binders up to date and start studying for your exam. When the bell rings, you guys have a great day. I'll see you guys tomorrow.